In letzter Zeit kann ein Anwachsen autoritärer, marxistisch-leninistischer K-Gruppen beobachtet werden. Einer dieser K-Gruppen, der kommunistischen Organisation, stellte jedenfalls das Deutsch-Russische Kulturinstitut in Dresden ihr Haus für eine Veranstaltung zur Verfügung. Diese fand am 6. Dezember 2025 statt. Die junge Welt-Autorin Susanne Witt-Stahl las aus ihrem Buch Der Bandera-Komplex. Stepan Bandera war während der deutschen Besatzung im Zweiten Weltkrieg Anführer eines Flügels der Organisation ukrainischer Nationalisten OUN-B. Die OUN-B kollaborierte zeitweise mit den deutschen Besatzern und beging Verbrechen unter anderem an der jüdischen und polnischen Bevölkerung. Die aktuelle russische Propaganda des Kremls hingegen setzt die gesamte heutige Ukraine mit Bandera von damals gleich, ohne zu differenzieren, und rechtfertigt so den derzeitigen russischen Angriffskrieg gegen die Ukraine. Und das tut auch die Zeitung Junge Welt bzw. ihre Autorin Susanne Witt-Stahl und eben auch am 6. Dezember im Deutsch-Russischen Kulturinstitut. Das Deutsch-Russische Kulturinstitut hat enge Verbindungen zur russischen Botschaft. Der Leiter des Deutsch-Russischen Kulturinstituts, Wolfgang Schelicke, war laut ND Aktuell ein persönlicher Freund von Putin aus dessen KGB-Zeit in Dresden. Der 88-jährige Schelicke war erst im Oktober 2025 in Moskau, wo er am sogenannten Internationalen Kooperationsforum zum 100-jährigen Jubiläum der Volksdiplomatie teilnahm. Gegen die Witt-Stahl-Lesung am 6. Dezember für die kommunistische Organisation im Deutsch-Russischen Kulturinstitut protestierten ca. 50 Leute. Zu den Protesten gegen die Veranstaltung aufgerufen hatte auch der Verein russischsprachiger Demokratinnen und Demokraten, der in Sachsen aktiv ist. Der Verein russischsprachiger Demokratinnen und Demokraten war auch Kooperationspartner einer anderen Veranstaltung am Tag der Menschenrechte am 10. Dezember, die in der Gedenkstätte Bautzner Straße stattfand. Dort, wo jetzt die Gedenkstätte Bautzner Straße ist, war bis 1989 in der DDR die Bezirksverwaltung des Ministeriums für Staatssicherheit. Die Stasi hatte dort eine Untersuchungshaftanstalt und einen Veranstaltungssaal. In diesem Veranstaltungssaal feierte auch damals der damalige KGB-Mitarbeiter Wladimir Putin zusammen mit der Stasi. Zur Veranstaltung am 10. Dezember, jetzt in diesem Saal, kamen 2 Menschenrechtlerinnen, die aus Russland nach Deutschland flohen. Ekaterina Schulmann, Politikwissenschaftlerin, und Olga Romanowa, Leiterin der NGO Russland hinter Gittern. Nach ihren Reden wurden sie befragt. Wie kann man in Deutschland russischen Menschenrechtlern helfen? Olga Romanowa meinte: Waffen an die Ukraine und Briefe an Inhaftierte in Russland schicken. Am 17. Dezember erklärte die russische Generalstaatsanwaltschaft den Verein russischsprachiger Demokratinnen und Demokraten e.V. zur unerwünschten NGO, obwohl der Verein in Russland nicht aktiv ist. Ihre Begründung: Der Verein nutze das Potenzial von Auswanderern und Oppositionellen, die russischsprachige Diaspora in Sachsen ideologisch zu beeinflussen, wo es unter den Bürgern eine hohe Unterstützung für Parteien gibt, die einen Kurs der Normalisierung der Beziehungen zu Russland verfolgen. Damit droht Menschen, die Kontakt zum Verein haben, in Russland Verfolgung und Repression. Am Donnerstag, den 18. Dezember 2025, fand wiederum eine interessante Veranstaltung in Dresden statt. Organisiert diesmal von der Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung, sprach Maksym Butkevych aus Kyjiw, Ukraine. Maksym Butkevych war in der Ukraine bekannt für seinen Einsatz für Menschenrechte, seinen kritischen Journalismus, seine pazifistischen und antifaschistischen Überzeugungen und seine Rolle in der ukrainischen anarchistischen Szene. Nach der russischen Vollinvasion am 24. Februar 2022 schloss er sich der ukrainischen Armee an. Im Juni 2022 wurde er in der Ostukraine als Kriegsgefangener gefangen genommen. Nach 28 Monaten Haft wurde er ausgetauscht und freigelassen. Der folgende Mitschnitt ist leicht gekürzt.
Good evening, my name is Paweł, I'm from Linksnet Collective in Leipzig, and I'm very, very happy and honored to moderate today's evening with Maksym Butkevych. And I would like to thank the Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung for organizing today's evening and Zentralwerk for hosting us. I'm honored to be today here with Maksym Butkevych, an Ukrainian human rights activist, journalist, philosopher, anthropologist, and many others. Maksym studied in Taras Shevchenko National University in Kyjiw, philosophy, as I said, anthropology at the University of Sussex. He worked for the BBC in London and co-founded Hromadzkie Radio in the Ukraine. He is also associated with Amnesty International, Initiative No Borders, Zimna Human Rights Center. Mostly he works with stateless people, with refugees, and with people on the move. He also initiated Doku Days Ukraine, International Human Rights Documentary Festival. And today we're here because there is also a book with text by Maksym Butkevych that was published here in Germany as just after the full-scale invasion, Russian invasion on Ukraine in 2022. Maksym decided to, as an peace activist and human rights activist, to join the Ukrainian military to fight with the Russian enemy, and unfortunately got into the Russian captivity, where he spent 28 months. And luckily, through hostage exchange, is now again free. Maybe a few things. The book today is available, Gegenspende, and I think is the great possibility to also get a signature. In the back, there are also T-shirts and gadgets connected to solidarity collectives, anti-authoritarian collective in Ukraine that supports civilians in the occupied in East Ukraine and also the military. And Maksym also left a small paper with a QR code at the table with the T-shirts and the books, because there was a fundraising you organized for the power plant. Maybe you will tell us a little bit more about it. Yes, Maksym Butkevych also awarded with the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. I think we need an applause for Maksym. Thank you very much. So yes, Maksym, I'm really happy that it's today actually your second event in former East Germany. Yesterday we were in Leipzig, today we are in Dresden. As I said before, you are already 20 years active as a human rights activist. You work with migrants, with refugees. You studied philosophy, anthropology. Where did all this started, your left-wing engagement and your political activity?
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming tonight. And I apologize for not being able to speak German, so that this event is held in English. It's a very broad question. Where did it all started? Probably I should say a few words from my childhood, because I grew up in Soviet Union. I'm a Soviet kid, actually. I was a member of all those kids' communist organizations affiliated to the Communist Party, and I truly believed in what official propaganda said, because a number of values which were propagated were actually very close to me and to my family, like values of solidarity, mutual aid, putting collective interests ahead of individual interests, etc. But later on, when the time passed, when I grew up, I started to see more and more, to have more and more questions, and to see more and more discrepancies between what was told and what was the reality. And also it was in the second half of 80s, last century, so more and more historical truths started to come out, and I saw more and more hypocrisy in what was going on. Also, some of the questions I had were related to part of my identity, which is Ukrainian. I was born in Kyjiw, and I lived in Kyjiw, my beautiful native city, which was predominantly Russian-speaking at the time. But I couldn't understand why we live in Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, where it is not only unfashionable, but it's better not to speak Ukrainian, it's better to speak Russian. Or for instance, why study in Ukrainian school where all subjects are taught in Russian, but in all classes but one, they're taught in Russian, but they're still called Ukrainian school. And in the next school, which was called Russian, there was no Ukrainian language whatsoever. I realized that many things we are told are not really followed in real life. And then truths about history. I learned about parts of history of my family. For instance, about my great-grandfather who was executed in 1938 during Stalin's Great Terror as the enemy of the people. Although he's done nothing wrong, of course, it was just that he was literate and he was critical of the whole system, and it was enough to kill him. There were many other factors. At the end of the day, I joined as a kid movement for independence in Ukraine, and I think I was a kid with ideas. It was time when a lot of kids had a lot of ideas. So I believe that was the beginning of my political engagement. But fight for independence of Ukraine was part of a broader fight for freedom. Freedom individual, freedom collective, freedom from dominant ideology and the dictatorship of the Communist Party, which was the official ruler of the society. So this strive for freedom continued after Ukraine gained its independence, and when I was already in the university, I joined predominantly anarchist student union, which was called Direct Action, Remadia. I was active in that, I was part of it. And I started to be more and more interested in issues of human rights violations in Ukraine and abroad. After university, within some period of time, I became international news and current affairs journalist, and I covered events in different parts of the world. So when it came to refugees, to people who sought asylum in Ukraine while fleeing persecution in their home countries, I knew pretty well what kind of authoritarian regimes and persecutions they are fleeing from, and as an activist, I understood that they need our support and our help. So this is how my work, my activity, because it was not work, work is something sometimes for people to do from 9 to 5 and then go back home. But human rights is not something that can be left in the office, that you can do 9 to 5. It is at the very core of your life. So I started to be involved in human rights issues, and I dedicated to human rights, I would say more than 20 years of my life, when I still was a journalist, but then I moved the focus of my attention completely to human rights violations. And this is why I was at the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion into Ukraine at the end of February 2022.
Thank you for this introduction, and maybe a small comment on language. I'm actually very happy that we talked today in English. In one of the interviews you also said it was something that kept you, gave you hope in the captivity. You imagined that you talk about it in English and you were really afraid to forget the English language. And to be honest, the Germans maybe could learn something from Eastern European who I think know more languages than in Germany. There's I think every refugee or migrant person knows what I'm talking about. Yes, thank you for this introduction. And in the book with your text, I found it very interesting. There is a fragment about how you and your friends or other activists, you occupied the migration office during the Maidan uprising in 2013 and following. For the audience, maybe a few words. Maidan uprising was civil unrest and a revolution in the Ukraine that started after Viktor Yanukovych, the president, decided not to follow the idea of integration with the European Union, and the protests against it were met with the police, very violent police reaction. Maybe you will also tell about it more, but how was your engagement in the Maidan? What are your memories about the time?
Yes, I was actually quite lucky on that, because currently when Ukrainians remember, there are massive protests which changed the course of the country's history. The first protest, which is more and more often recalled now, is still in Soviet times in 1990, so-called Revolution of Granite, when students announced hunger strike until their demands are met. And as a kid, I was supporting them. Actually, I was organizing a strike in my school, and at the public rally, which marked the end of the hunger strike, that was the first time when I delivered a speech to a big number of people, and I was 13 at the time, so it was really an adventure to me. Then I participated, although mostly in distance, in the mass protest of 2004, but when Maidan uprising of 2013-2014 started, I was in Kyjiw and I took part in it. It started with the decision of that time President Yanukovych to make a U-turn on the path of European integration, and before that official policy, Yanukovych was in power by that time for 3 years, and he consolidated his grip upon the country, and he used the country's budget as his own pocket money, basically. His family tried to monopolize all sectors of profitable sectors of the economy. There were also political repressions, but at last minute, when Ukraine found itself on the crossroads between either going towards Europe, meaning respect towards rule of law, human rights, and pluralistic democracy, or move towards Russia and be included in Russian space and be more and more integrated into Russian-controlled area. Last minute, Yanukovych decided that he is with Russia, and he wants Ukraine to be part of Russian space. There was a protest against it, it was massive, but it became an uprising when riot police violently dispersed that protest with brutality, and this is when a lot of people went to the streets. So it was not about the European Union as such, as an institution, it was about choosing the path the country will follow, and it was in the first place protest against police brutality and how arbitrarily that time rulers of Ukraine decided future for dozens of millions of people who live in Ukraine. Maidan at first was peaceful, and then the enforcement agencies started to use weapons against protesters. They started to kidnap some of the protesters and shoot at some others. It escalated into street fighting, and then before and after that time President Yanukovych fled the country, a lot of governmental buildings were occupied by the protesters. By that time, we for years already cared about people who sought asylum in Ukraine, about refugees, about asylum seekers, and mostly people who turned to us, they were from former Soviet countries, from former Soviet Central Asia, like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, from countries of Southern Caucasus, from Russia, from Belarus, of course, and none of them actually had any chance to get asylum in Ukraine, because Yanukovych was friendly with Lukashenko in Belarus, with Putin in Russia, with Aliyev in Azerbaijan, with Karimov in Uzbekistan. They were all kind of colleagues, they were friends. So of course asylum could not be granted by friend Yanukovych to people who were persecuted by his friend Karimov in Uzbekistan, for instance. So what we tried to do, we tried to secure legal procedure for these people as long as possible so that they cannot be deported. But we also had information that Ukrainian enforcement agencies and the Ukrainian State Migration Service shared information about refugees with their countries of origin. So, for instance, someone came and applied for asylum because that person is persecuted in Uzbekistan, and information about that person was sent to Uzbekistan, so that Uzbek authorities know where to look for this person, in Ukraine in particular. We hoped at the time of Maidan that there will be justice, that all crimes committed under the Yanukovych regime would be investigated and justice would be restored. So we did not want the State Migration Service to destroy official documents, which might have served as a proof, as evidence later on during the investigation. Also, we insisted that the asylum system in Ukraine should be reformed, and it should serve the needs of people who seek asylum rather than interests of state institutions. And there was another reason we didn't speak very much publicly about at the time. Maidan was very diverse. As an uprising, as a movement, it included people of all political views, from the far left wing, anti-authoritarian, anarchist, socialist, liberals, conservatives, undecisive, to the far right. And there were far right groups there as well. So we really didn't want any far right group to take over the State Migration Service and to have access to files of refugees with their home addresses, etc. We decided we should be there first, so we occupied the State Migration Service. We did not interfere into its work, but we guarded the premises where the documents were kept. And at the end of it, unfortunately, in very short time after Maidan ended, Russia started its war against Ukraine, started occupation of Crimea, and the situation changed. So there was internal audit of the documents, and the State Migration Service conducted by the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and then there was a memorandum signed by both protesters and state authorities that asylum system will be reformed and things which happened before will never be repeated. So far, asylum system in Ukraine is very far from ideal. Still, it is in pretty bad shape. But as you can imagine, not many people seek asylum in Ukraine nowadays, because people don't seek asylum in a country which is engulfed in war. But we understand that sooner or later this war will be over, and this is when we need to build a system of asylum which will really be sensitive towards the needs of those who arrive fleeing persecution and saving their freedom and their health and their lives.
Thank you very much, Maksym. I was telling it yesterday, but I think I want to repeat it also today. I think it's very inspirational that you did it, considering that here in Saxony, I know two cases, a Georgian family and I think a Vietnamese man who was illegally deported. The Georgian family was deported to Georgia. I think it was 2 years ago. They sued the German state, and now they are back. I know that also here in Dresden on the train station some refugees from Ukraine that were not with Ukrainian passport, and the people of color were held at the police station when people were coming to Germany. So I think that the German activists can take example from you when it comes to migration policy here in Saxony. But let's go to next question. In many Eastern European countries, in Poland, the recruitation to the army now is a very controversial topic, very highly disputed topic, and actually right now in German parliament, many men in Poland are also preparing for the invasion or for attacks. For you, as a human rights activist, as an anarchist, in 2022, in February, after the invasion, it was kind of the only choice to join the army, to join the military action against Russian invasion. And you, as the title of the book, you felt that you are am richtigen Platz, that it was something natural to do. And of course, many people are wondering what they would do in your situation, in your position. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How was the decision-making process, so to say?
It was quite a long process, actually. With the beginning of the war in 2014, some of my friends went to fight for Ukraine, while me and my colleagues, we had to switch most of our activities to the assistance to internally displaced persons, to people who had to flee occupied Crimea and later on the occupied parts of the battle zone in Donbas region of Ukraine. The numbers grew very quickly. At first there were thousands of people who had to flee Crimea, but very soon we witnessed dozens and then hundreds of thousands. At some point the number was frozen more or less at 1.5 million IDPs in Ukraine. I was coordinating at the time a coalition of non-governmental organizations and of Ombudsman's Office of Ukraine, called Resource Center for IDPs, but I understood very quickly, I think it was in autumn, winter of 2014, that I'm able to do my work, I'm able to do what I can, only because there are other people at the front line who defend me, and by this they allow me to do that. They kind of buy me time, risking their own lives, suffering injuries, and living the way military people do. So when the Russian full-scale invasion against Ukraine was launched on 24th of February of 2022, I thought that this time I should be among those who allow my colleagues in the human rights movement to do their job by defending them. There were other reasons as well, of course. I'm Ukrainian, as I mentioned, it's part of my identity, and I never wanted Ukraine to be subjugated by Russia. I was in Kyjiw at the time, in my native city, and the battle raged on the outskirts of Kyjiv already. The city was endangered, and the choice was very simple, to flee or to fight. And I couldn't imagine myself fleeing. I opted for fighting. I decided to fight. And there was another reason which was important for me. I said it, but I will repeat it again because it was really important. I was called human rights defender before that for many years. And to me it's quite an honorable title, you know. To be called human rights defender, it means that you really try to defend the rights of people whose rights are endangered or violated by the state. Human rights situation in Ukraine was, and of course still is, very far from ideal. But over the years of campaigning and of protest and of education, of advocacy, human rights movement in Ukraine managed to achieve quite a lot. The situation in 2022 was incomparable to situation in, say, 2004 or 2006 or 2010 was much better when it comes to human rights. Would it be freedom of expression, freedom of assemblies, prevention of torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, and many other things, police brutality. And I knew that if Russia takes over, if Russia wins, everything we've achieved would be just erased to the ground. Because in Russian-controlled territories, what kind of freedom of expression, what kind of freedom of assemblies, it's all non-existent. I knew pretty well the human rights situation in Russia. I was in touch with my human rights colleagues in Russia and among refugees whom I tried to assist. There were people who were fleeing persecution in Russia as well. So I knew that if Russia wins, there would be no human rights defense, there would be no human rights activism, because human rights as a concept is absent from the ideology of the Russian world. And if I was called human rights defender, I had to defend human rights with means available to me. And I'm afraid at the end of February 2022, to defend human rights meant to me to take up arms and to join the defense forces of Ukraine. And this is what I've done.
Thank you so much for your answer. The next question. As I already mentioned, in the captivity, you were afraid to forget English language. You even mentioned that you were afraid that you will forget Ukrainian language, which is a great testimony of what kind of situation was it for you or other war prisoners. You spent in Russian captivity 28 months. Can you share what memories you have from this time and what it was for you?
Well, I will not bore you with all my memories from that time because it was 2 years and 4 months exactly, right? I have many memories, but it went through different stages. The most difficult were original several months. First, when we were captured, we were transported to the city of Luhansk. We didn't know where we are going, of course, where we are taken. On the second day on the road, we were visited by Russian military propagandists who made videos with us for propaganda purposes. And they took us one by one to the neighboring room and were talking there. I was the only officer among those captured. I was commander to most of those guys. And I didn't hide the fact that before I was a journalist and a human rights defender, they were intrigued. They didn't know what human rights defender is. They didn't understand it really. But journalists, they understood in their way, in Russian way. To them it was propagandist. They really confused journalism and propaganda. But so they were interested in talking to me. They started with saying, never use the word war, because there is no war. There is special military operation, which is not war. Therefore, laws of war do not apply. Second, you think that you are prisoners of war, POWs, but you are not. Well, there is no war. And second, you just disappeared in the battle zone. And if you don't follow all the orders you are given, you might never appear again. And they offered me to go to the backyard and to look at the bodies of those who did not understand the point. So basically they said that they executed Ukrainian prisoners of war who did not follow the orders. And they said, when you reach your destination point, you will be registered, and this is when Geneva Conventions and everything will apply to you. They were lying. Maybe they didn't know it, but they were lying, because Geneva Conventions never started to apply to us. In the first several months, we didn't have anything. We were kept in prison in Luhansk, in the wing specifically designated for Ukrainian prisoners of war. We didn't have any hygienic items, just a brick of soap and a towel. We didn't have toilet paper, leaving aside toothbrush, toothpaste, all these, inventions of civilization. We didn't have anything to read, anything to write with or on. We didn't have shoes, because Russian military took our shoes off, because apparently Ukrainian military shoes are better than Russian ones, so they wanted to use them. We didn't have anything to cut our fingernails with. We had to scratch them against the wall. In the first couple of weeks there were a lot of interrogations. Some of them were violent. And overall there was an atmosphere of fear and violence created in that part of the prison. When prisoners of war were forced to do, for instance, excessive physical exercises, they took us to the corridor and ordered us to do a lot of sit-ups or push-ups until someone started to fall. And it was very hot summer of 2022. Later on we had to learn by heart the anthem of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic, and even later we had to learn Russian anthem by heart and to sing it when they ordered us to sing it. The food was scarce. We were fed 3 times a day, but the portions were really small and the food was really bad. So everyone lost quite a lot of weight. That was the only time in my life when I was happy that I had excessive weight before. So I lost some weight and I was still fine, but some other guys actually were in quite poor condition. Since my release I gained up weight, as you can see again. So now I'm coming back to my previous self in this regard. The feeling of hunger was constant. Later on it started to change, but in less than 2 months' time, my captors decided it's not enough to keep me as prisoner of war, as a POW. And they decided to fabricate a criminal case against me and to sentence me as a war criminal. There was a forceful interrogation session which lasted for several hours, which when I was put in the stress position, I was beaten, kicked and punched, and they basically explained to me what my options are. Either I sign a confession in war crimes I've never committed, and they convict me as a war criminal and exchange me in 2 months' time. Or I don't do that and they shoot me, framing it as if I tried to escape. Or maybe they will put me in a cell with inmates who cooperate with administration, and those inmates will be ordered to break me physically and mentally, and I would curse every day my decision not to cooperate. So that was a choice I was offered. In March of 2023, I was sentenced as a war criminal by the so-called Supreme Court of Luhansk People's Republic to 13 years of imprisonment. And within half a year's time, I was transported to the penal colony, to prison camp, also in occupied part of Ukraine, in Luhansk region, where I spent the rest of my sentence. Their situation was different, because finally there was sunlight, there was some fresh air. As POWs, we were never taken out for walks. For instance, we had to spend all of our time in our cells, where the light was never switched off, but there was no sunlight. When I was sentenced, I was transferred to the other part of the prison, where those accused of criminal offenses were held. And their regime was much lighter. They were treated much better than Ukrainian prisoners. Food was better, they had books, they could go out for walks, they had TV. This is when I consumed quite a lot of Russian propaganda, because I could not influence what to watch, unfortunately. But in prison camp, there was one thing which was absent in prison. In penal colony there was one thing which was forced labor. We were forced to work on sometimes quite difficult jobs, physically. And this was a place from which I was released in October last year. At the end of my captivity, in the last several months, something changed. We were told that we are not prisoners of war anymore, or that we are convicted by the court, so we are just regular convicts. But as regular convicts, we could send and receive letters. So I started to write letters to my friends in Russia and in other countries and receive letters. In total, I sent and received several hundreds of letters. It was incredible. There were so many people who were writing to me. And I tried to respond to every single letter. Some of these letters, of my letters, 3 of them, I believe, or 4 of them, I included in this book. And I could read books, finally. So it changed a lot. But yeah, this is what the situation was like at different stages of my captivity.
In your book, you also write about, from your previous years, maybe from your youth, of your reading of Shalamov, for example, and it struck me that, like from one of his short stories, you also, in the time when you didn't have, I think, possibility to read books, you were memorizing and making up some apocalyptic short stories, just to go on and share them with other prisoners. And in the book we can also read about your another part of your life, which is religion. Did it also had helped you to survive in the captivity?
Yes, actually, I was never bored in captivity. Boredom is one of the terrible things. When you are there, fear, violence, and next one is boredom. I have seen so many prisoners of war who didn't know what to do with their time because, as I said, we didn't have anything at all. So I kept myself busy, and I always had something to do. I was never bored. I was really afraid of losing my English language, so I tried to compose texts in my head in English or in Ukrainian. I tried to imagine the situation when there is an English-speaking audience, and I speak to English-speaking audience in English, as I do now, so, dreams coming true. Fortunately, it's really cool. I composed other sorts of texts, like in one of the cells, I've noticed that my cellmates, also prisoners of war, are very bored, and I couldn't sleep at night because of the bright light and feeling of hunger. So I started to make up a story, like a fictional story, dystopian one, set in some distant future, but it was political satire. It was about a certain empire which has a special operation to end all special operations forever. So this is what was the setting. And next morning I told my cellmates, seeing that they are bored, maybe you want me to tell you a story I made up last night. They were very interested. I told them that, and they said, okay, we have 2 questions. First one is, are you okay mentally? And second one, what was next? So they basically stimulated me to continue to make up stories, and I had the whole cycle of short dystopian satirical stories, or philosophical ones. In another cell, we studied English, actually. I never taught any language to anyone before, but there, without any texts or without pen, without paper, we invented our own methods to learn English, and actually my best student made quite significant progress. Over time, it was very, very cool. It was great, and there were some religious practices. Yes, they helped me. I know for many people it is maybe strange to hear that someone with beliefs which can be described as anti-authoritarian or anarchist can be a believer, but here I am. I am a believer. I mentioned already that I was a Soviet kid, and my grandmother, she used to be a lecturer, state-appointed lecturer of scientific atheism. She lectured people why religion is bad and why faith is nonsense. And thanks to her, actually, I knew certain facts about Christianity, not only Christianity, different religions. So I became interested, and I decided to learn about it myself, not through her eyes. And when I started to learn more about it, I ended up being a believer, to her shock, of course. And this helped. It helped in captivity, not in the way that I felt that I would be protected. No, it was not about that, but it was about how to endure all the trials which happened to be in my way. So basically it had much more about living through this part of my path, of my life with dignity, and always having hope. I think it was a lot about hope and about also understanding that no matter what the outcome would be, I should live through it with a certain degree of honor and dignity. Yes.
Thank you so much. Maybe also some audience will have some questions about the captivity. I would like to now switch maybe a little bit to the present day and talk about politics, so to say. As you probably know, the global left or German left or global left is not, there is a discussion about solidarity with Ukraine. We are at the event organized by Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung, and Die Linke, for example, does not have the best opinions in the Ukrainian society. I know it also from the Ukrainian refugees who live in Saxony. What do you think when you read about German or global voices about you saying that I don't know, Putin or Russia has an anti-colonial goals, etc. What do you feel when you hear those discussions as a person that actually is has experience of this invasion?
Well, it is also a broad question, because to me, when I heard and when I read certain opinions from some part of international left, when it comes to Ukraine, there were several arguments which struck me, and to me there was quite a lot of disappointment, actually, to be honest. In the first place, there are theoretical ones and practical ones. Theoretical ones are, for instance, NATO is to blame, or American support Ukraine, which means that Russia wages anti-imperialist politics. And practical ones are, we are for peace and we don't want to give weapons to Ukraine, because to give weapons is to fuel war. Or, for instance, why Ukrainians don't give up their territories and receive peace in exchange. So these are separate texts. I will now respond to the former, but I will be happy to talk about the latter as well. Some people on the international left, including those who mattered a lot to me, I was surprised to hear that they speak about anti-imperialism, for instance, in a fashion which demonstrates that they mean only American imperialism. To me, to be anti-imperialist is to be against all empires. You know, as my t-shirt says, maybe it's not visible, the empire will fall. It doesn't say which empire. Any empire will fall, sooner or later. But to me it is really strange how people can be anti-imperialist supporting Russian imperialism. Because what we are dealing with in Ukraine is war against Russian imperialism. And Russia does not even try to hide its aspirations to be an empire. It wants to be an empire, it holds dear memories about times when it was an empire, it glorifies Russian empire, it glorifies Soviet Union as an empire of sorts, and now it wants to be back as an imperial force. And historically there was never Russian empire without Ukraine being part of it. So if they want to be an empire, they have to take over Ukraine. They really do. But Ukrainians for some reason don't want to be part of empire, not anymore. We hold anti-imperialist struggle. And here we have people who call themselves anti-imperialists. They come around and they say, well, we're not supporting Ukraine. Maybe these people should decide, are they really anti-imperialists or they're just anti-Americans? Nowadays it's even more complicated with the current position of the United States of America, because currently it's not really clear whom President Trump and his administration really supports. So it gets complicated. Next thing, which was surprising to me, was vocabulary. Or let's put it this way, a framework. I'll explain what I mean. When some people on the international left say it is NATO to blame for this war because NATO came too close to Russian borders, and Russia had legitimate concerns about NATO being close to its borders. While saying vocabulary, NATO is presented as some sort of an entity which encroaches towards Russia, and Russia defends itself against NATO. What about hundreds of millions of people actually these guys are talking about? What about Lithuanians? What about Poles? What about Ukrainians? They have their agency as well. They have a say, they have a voice. They should be able to decide whether they want to be part of any international bloc or not. They are not a sphere of influence, they are living human beings. And they have their agency, they can and want to change their future. One way or another, it is up to them to decide. And here we have people who say, power to the people, and then they start to speak language of empire, that the world is divided into the spheres of influence, and Russia has a sphere of near abroad, sphere of influence, and Americans have their sphere of influence, which blatantly ignores real desire, real wish of dozens and hundreds of millions of people. This is purely imperialist language. And I am not surprised when I meet this language on the right, but I'm genuinely surprised when I meet this language on the left. Really. So, to me it was a big disappointment, of course, when I met this. And when it comes to practical, I don't know if I should switch to it straight away, like to this arms to Ukraine thing.
Yeah. For definitely, I think it's very controversial, and we need your position on this was you were, so to say, for Ort, as you say in German. You were at the front, so it is definitely.
Yeah, because this question I'm asked quite a lot. Actually, what do I think about what those who are for peace say that arms should not be delivered to Ukraine? And what I usually respond, and this is honest, in the first place, I'm happy that they're able to say this, because it means that they live in relatively, at least, free society where people can express their opinion. Because in Russia, people cannot say, let's stop arms delivery to Russian army. They will be put in jail. It is a criminal offense to say things like this in Russia-controlled territories. But people in countries of Europe can still say this. So they are free to express their discontent, their dissent, and it is great. But what I would really call here for is intellectual honesty. Because when we see the current situation when Russia wages its aggressive and genocidal war against Ukraine, to call for a stop of arms delivery to Ukraine means basically is to wish Ukraine defeat. It means occupation. Occupation is not peace. Occupation is continuation of war. Occupation is repression of hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of people, some of whom, as we see already from what's going on the occupied territories, would be killed. Many more would be tortured, imprisoned, sent to Siberia. And it's not overestimation. Some people with whom I served my time in the penal colony, civilians from the occupied territories, they were sent to Siberia, to Omsk and to Chelyabinsk. So it is basically wishing Ukraine being destroyed as an independent entity, genocide in different forms be performed, and war to continue in the form of occupation. This is what people who propose to stop arms delivery to Ukraine really call for. So I would just suggest that they say, in this current war, we are with Russia. We want Russian army to defeat Ukrainian army, to occupy Ukraine, and to wage its genocide. This is what we really propose. And here we can have intellectually honest, real discussion. Because when people say we are for peace, and this is why we want aggressor to win, what does it have to do with peace? To me, it is a very simplistic comparison, of course. But unfortunately, it seems to be quite real. You know the situation when there is a crime, and there is a perpetrator, an aggressor, and there is a victim. And someone is present at the crime scene who is able to stop perpetrator by force, but doesn't do it saying, I am for peace, I don't want to incite any conflict, I don't want to participate in it. Well, this person becomes complicit to the crime. I really believe in it. It is an issue of responsibility. If you could stop crime being committed in front of your eyes, but you didn't do anything, you participate in this crime. This is as simple as it gets. And what Russia does in Ukraine is a crime of gigantic proportions. It is huge. And people who say, we don't want to interfere, they become complicit to this crime. Leaving aside one more thing, probably. I watched, as I mentioned before, a lot of Russian propaganda shows. I had to. I didn't have a say. When I was in a cell, I was the only prisoner of war at the time in the cell with people who were accused of criminal offenses. I was crop, so I couldn't really have a say in what to watch. So I had to consume a lot of Russian propaganda. Russian propagandists never tried to hide the fact that they say that they don't wage war against Ukraine. They wage a war against the collective West, against degraded liberal Europe, which has forgotten what traditional values are. And Russian soldier is ready to remand. When those military propagandists who visited us, whom I talked about before, talked to me, it was summer 2022. They said, we acknowledge that Ukrainian stage of military operation didn't go as planned, but sooner or later will destroy you, will eliminate you. And by the end of it, we will have the most battle-hardened army in Europe, and we will be so ready to move forward. And by that time, it was more conversation than interrogation, so I dared to ask them, move forward where to? Will you move to Poland or Baltic states? They laughed and said, why limit ourselves with Poland? We said, the most battle-hardened army in Europe. So, of course, they do not take decisions, but it reflects overall mood among Russian military in 2022 and still. So, if people think that war of Russia against Ukraine is some very distant story and it does not affect them, my bad news for these people are that Russians don't think so. Russians think that all people of Europe are pretty much inside this story.
Das war Maksym Butkevych am 18. Dezember 2025 im Zentralwerk in Dresden auf Einladung der Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung.